Good evening, everyone. In the news this week, China's Falcon clone crashes and burns. What is that going to mean for the industry? PitchBook came out with a quarterly report that's saying private equity fundraising is starting on the uptick again after a big drop last year and beyond. Does NASA's cancellation of Viper mean the loss of their leadership in lunar exploration? And that and a whole lot more coming up. From the news desk at the Center for Space Commerce and Finance, I'm Thomas Andrew Olson, and this is The Unknown Quantity. So welcome, everyone. If you're new here, I'd like to give you a few words of introduction. So what is what we call the Center all about? We're about doing the business of space. We champion and strengthen emerging space startups, space scalable SMEs, space adjacent enterprises worldwide through advisory, access, and advocacy across the funding spectrum. Our programs fortify business plans and investor readiness for founding teams at varying levels of development. And that's our mission in life. Since 2007, we've hosted space investment summits throughout the US, and we even hosted one in Luxembourg. Since 2009, we've operated the longest continuously running space startup business pitch event, the New Space Business Plan Competition. We have helped 80 companies get introduced to the world and awarded over $400,000 in prize money to over 20 of them. Our latest initiative is Space Microgrants, where we award $1,000 to early stage startups each month, no strings attached, for whatever they need to do to get going forward. September is going to close soon, so click the link below to apply at spacemicrofund.com. Now, let me introduce my co-host this evening, Michael Lane, who's also a board member of the Center and CEO of Liftport. Come on in, Michael. We were just talking like a minute ago. Okay. Oh, all right. Well, there's a lot of interesting things going on this week. I guess Michael's having a PC problem all of a sudden, so he'll be with us in a minute. I don't know if I'll be able to show you the video on this, but China has created a lot of private sector type companies that are basically out to clone SpaceX gear and a lot of other different types of private activities. There are several aerospace private startups, including LinkSpace, iSpace, Galactic Energy, Space Pioneer, and one in particular is called Deep Blue Aerospace. Now, they wanted to literally emulate the success of SpaceX's Falcon series, and that they had with vertical takeoff and landing of rockets. And so they're mimicking the groundbreaking experiments that SpaceX once performed with its Grasshopper test vehicle more than a decade ago. So that's kind of where they are. So Deep Blue's Nebula 1 rocket only had a diameter of like 3 1/3 meters, about 11 feet, just slightly smaller than the Falcon 9, but that's the base they're starting from. And they did do a quick launch test, and they're trying to bring it back down, and they almost made it. The thing looks hauntingly like a Falcon 9, interestingly, and the engines cut a little too soon, and the thing came down too hard, and it just kind of blew up on the pad. And it was actually a lovely image, interestingly, and they put it out there on X even to show everybody. Yeah, we're working on this. We're getting there. So they are committed to doing private sector commercial space stuff. They want to get into competition with SpaceX and other companies. And this shows, even though it was a failure the other day, it shows that they are committed to this process, and a lot of other companies besides. So watch out, they're coming. And actually, a couple weeks from now, we're going to be discussing that a whole lot more. How are we with Michael? We're not there yet. Okay. God, this is so funny because I was just talking to Michael literally before we started the show tonight, and everything was fine. I guess he was going to. I knew he's in Seattle area, so he's in Seattle area. His room is such that this big light was coming in from the sun because it's not going down yet. I'm in Central Florida, so it's pitch dark. Um, but it looked like that light was going to like shine right in his face, and he went up to change the drapery or do something to cut some of that sun out of there. And that was the last we saw of him. So I guess something happened between now and then. And apparently, our producer Leah is just telling me that he's rebooting, so he'll be with us shortly. Some other interesting thing that happened in the news this week. There's a bunch of stuff. I know Michael wants to talk about stuff. There was an outfit, PitchBook, which is a big reporting firm for equity investments. They gather lots and lots of data, and they put out a quarterly report on fundraising activity. And what they're saying apparently is that private equity investing, fundraising is starting to tick up a little bit because it's been pretty bad. In the last year, it dropped significantly, and then it's starting to pick up again. They said in the first quarter it's like 300 billion is coming in, and so that looks really good for some major growth this year. Perhaps we'll see if the space industry can get something out of that as well. I want to go up here on something. They have a report you can download for free, which I did, so you don't have to. They showed this just kind of this thumbnail sketch year-over-year fundraising changes, and the only things that really rose the only sectors that really rose in fundraising so far this year has been private equity, real assets, and what they call secondary markets. Everything else was down. The fund of funds, which was a big deal once, that's down. Private debt is down. Real estate's down about 58%, actually. Venture capital's down about 33%. But private equity is up 14.9. Real assets like oil and land and agricultural things, that's up 290%. I don't know if everybody's preparing for the zombie apocalypse or what's going on, but there's a huge move to real assets, and then secondaries, which is subsidiaries of other markets and derivatives of other markets that are also doing well. You'll find a lot of investment going into that. About 97 billion is all, but compared to 610 for private equity so far this year. And so I wanted to, we have a link for that so we could share that. And so if you're interested in those kinds of things, you should take a look at that. I think it's really interesting. It may give us some hope for this year. Now I want to get into something I think is kind of three things that we're going to talk about in pretty serious way. And the first one I want to discuss is NASA's cancellation of Viper. Now, Viper was a big, major lunar exploration vehicle and a big project as a science rover, and it was going to go to the moon's south pole to explore for water ice. Now, 2 months ago, NASA canceled it. And that decision was made despite the fact that, crazily, the rover is fully built. It has completed final testing. Now, a lot of people, of course, especially professional lunar scientists and engineers, would maintain, if they were here, that the cancellation is a mistake. And they're saying that it's sending a wrong message. It's sending a message that NASA isn't really serious about sustainable space exploration through Artemis, their return to the moon program, and that apparently the United States is willing to let China and maybe other countries become the world leaders in lunar science, exploration, and resources. That's a big charge. Um, Now, while NASA will say in their press releases that, quote, the pillars of science, national posture, and inspiration form the foundation of the agency's exploration plans, the Viper cancellation undermines all of that. It signals to the lunar community that, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, as soon as Michael gets here, is that science somehow is not really important under Artemis. And it's allowing other countries to pick up the load and establish a different standard, perhaps, than many of us would like for how the moon is to be explored and exploited in one way or another. And of course, we're not going to get any real-time video of the first ever lunar rover in operation on the moon that could have inspired countless students and everybody else. So now, of course, as you might guess, China, who we'll be talking about a lot here in the next couple of weeks, is able and willing to fill that void. The Chang'e 7 and 8 missions, I think I pronounced that right. They're planning on exploring the lunar South Pole for water ice in 2026 and 28. And this comes just after China returned the first ever samples from the far side of the moon. So the last time the U.S. returned a lunar sample was over 50 years ago. So, because China, they're very aggressive with what they want to do on the moon. They intend to build an international lunar research station on the moon, and the data from the missions over the next few years will be used to inform where to actually do that. So are they going to get the best real estate? Will they set the precedent for extracting and using lunar resources? Well, we just don't know enough about that yet. And it says here, Apollo 50 years ago proved that exploration can enable science. And Viper was intended to prove that the science could enable exploration.
Yeah.
So it was expected to deliver critical science results about lunar water ice and at the same time validating how future exploration missions could then live off the land, quote unquote, using local resources. And this is something we've studied about for 30 years is
right.
ISRU. Michael, you're here.
I am so sorry. I don't know what happened with the world's internet, but I crashed just as I hit the on button. So I'm glad you were able to carry on. That was a little awkward, but this I think this is a kind of a big deal, right? So yeah. I want to just kind of scroll down to the bottom of this to talk about some of these people. I've known Dr. Neal and Dr. Metzger for probably 20 years and Neal for probably 8 or 9. I mean, we're not beer drinking buddies or anything like that, but these folks have been at the heart of lunar development for a really long time. So, I mean, they have real credentials in this field, and their opinions carry weight. So I think that that's something that we should be talking about too, is that this isn't just some rando folks that are making this claim. Like, these people are speaking for the community and saying this is kind of terrible. Okay, fine. There's some budget questions. There's some budget problems. Okay, cool. But China's mission on the moon has been going uninterrupted, steady, for 5 years now. I was giving a presentation to Air Force Space Command, the chief scientist of Air Force Space Command, 3 days after this mission landed in, I think it was was it January 2019, I think. January 20,
something like
something
that.
like that.
Yeah.
They have been operating for a really long time, and they have done stuff that that the United States can't currently do. And we're going to talk about this more with our guest next month, Dr. Autry. But this is a really interesting situation here, and so for this,
these are great people. I mean, I have known a Phil Mesker for a long time. I don't know Daniel Britt, but they're both at University of Central Florida. Greg Autry just joined them at University of Central Florida. This is becoming a hub of something, and I'm honestly I'm trying to crack into and get some good out of it for the whole community. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. But yeah, this is like ridiculous, and I don't know if it's a budget problem. I don't know what they're having. I mean, I'm always keen to sit here on my high horse and blame Artemis for a lot of this, because it's been a serious money and time suck for over a decade now to get this thing off where they've gotten one launched so far. If they're lucky, they'll maybe launch two more with people in it. I don't know where they go after that. It's picking up a lot of money, and so you lose Viper because of that. I mean, this has happened before. They spend a lot of money on launch. They spend a lot of money on these big projects, and then the really good stuff, when it involves true exploration and real science, it falls by the wayside.
And the Artemis program and the Artemis Accords has nearly 50 signatories, 44, 47, something like that. It's so many I've literally lost count. For a while, I was like, woohoo, 6, 7, 8, 9. And now we're into the 40s. It's like, okay, it's a lot, right? I've stopped counting. But the Chinese-focused Lunar Research Station, that's got 9 partners, 8, 9 partners, something like that. I don't think they've crossed into double digits. I don't think they're at 10 yet, but 7, 8, 9 partners, and Russia being one of them. They're definitely willing to, as this article says, willing and able to fill the voids. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. My hope is that Viper gets rescheduled and put back on another rocket, because I think you're right. I think the budget that's been allocated to the Space Launch System, SLS, or as our friend Tomlinson calls it, the Senate Launch System. He has more colorful phrases, but I'm going to use that one. That there's been an awful lot of budget assigned to stuff that really has questionable value for exploration and development. So it's going to be interesting to see where this leads. But my hope is that this is an opinion piece. It's not a fact piece. But people
I could throw out one of my own. I could ask the rhetorical question: can you have the Artemis Accords and not have Artemis?
Yeah, really.
I'm only half kidding.
Yeah,
because we've been, as you know, for 40 years almost, we've been saying that NASA should buy the ride, and now that there is a ride to buy for a lot less money on average, and why are they still doing this stuff themselves and spending all that money when they could just buy the ride and get a lot more bang for their buck?
Yeah,
the military sees this. Why doesn't NASA see this?
Yeah, let's move on to some of our other topics. What do you want to talk about next?
Okay, well, the next up was something that you were interested. The next two things are something that they're very dear to you, so I want you to take the lead on that. And the first one is that infographic from Bryce Tech.
Oh yeah, since we're talking about the moon,
this is cool. This is something that's actually happening, as opposed to the integrated space plan. That changes every year. This is real.
Right here. So It's taking a moment to load. So I'll talk about Bryce for a moment. Bryce is a consultancy based out of Washington, D.C., but they also kind of stretch out into Europe, not so much in Asia that I'm aware of, but they focus on space. They focus, I think, exclusively on space. I think they're talking about looking at energy as well. Leah, do you think you can pull this up? Because I am having connectivity problems like I've never had before.
Yeah, I don't want to lose you again, man.
No, I don't want to lose me either. Let me
because I did download that image. I don't know if I can
edit
it somehow.
In the middle, I'm going to stop sharing here. Well, let's just talk about it. We don't need to go there. I'm gonna kill this and see if I can.
I can pop it up on my screen, and I can't see you or even see me, but I can surely see this thing, and I can stare at my own camera. And
I got this. All right, it's happening now.
Yeah.
Okay. So Bryce has been putting together a bunch of reports, and they've been at this for a long time. And since we are having troubles with connectivity, I'm going to make sure that I put this in the chat so y'all can follow along. But what they have done is they've done a scan of the kind of global ecosystem for the commercial sector of space, of the moon, commercial sector of the moon. And they've broken it into service companies, resource companies, and manufacturing companies.
Yep.
And it's really a who's who of who's doing what.
It is. I'm looking at it right now. It's just amazing to see a lot of people we know.
Yeah. It's broken down into cargo and human transport, utilities, maintenance and servicing, lunar rovers, spacesuits. It really is quite a remarkable. And of course, there's companies that are going to be dominating it, like SpaceX. But then, we've known the folks at Orbit Fab for,
before they were Orbit Fab.
Long before they were Orbit Fab. Long
before a long time. Yeah.
Redwire, Interloon. Interloon is Rob Meyer's company. He used to be the guy who led Blue Origin. He's created his own space resource company. Moon Express is on there, and you can grab this image for yourself.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know why my internet's not working super well today. I don't usually have this problem, but it's remarkable. It's got folks we're going to talk about later tonight. Axiom on there talking about spacesuits. Redwire. Last episode 2 weeks ago, we talked about many of the SPAC companies.
Yep.
They're in here. Some of them are in here. It's quite a remarkable graphic. I now have turned it into my my screen background, so it's the first thing I see because I kind of want to know who these folks are. And there's something else that's a little bit interesting about it, which is they have attempted to define cislunar space. And I know that sounds like we're really getting into the weeds of things, but that definition has been elusive for a while. We know Major Sean McLean came up with what I dubbed the McLean line, which is that area of space in which Earth is the dominant gravitational field,
Right.
and that includes the moon, and that includes all 5 Lagrange points. So it's a giant sphere, so much bigger than a geosynchronous sphere or a Leo meosphere. And by defining what this cislunar space environment is, that's an important thing. And it's Leah, if you could put the graphic up, if you got it, that would be terrific.
It was just up a minute ago.
Yeah,
it's webpage. There you go. There it's back.
There we go. Thanks, Leah. So now finally we can kind of see this thing. I encourage you. I put the link in the chat. I encourage you to go to Bryce. You've got to quote pay for it by giving them your name and email address. But I find their reports to be very useful, so I'm happy to share that. So, what are your thoughts on this, Tom?
Well, it reminds me of remember the integrated space plan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were trying to plan out everything in rigid uniformity for the next 100 years or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, and every couple of years they have to put out a new version because events keep getting ahead of them. Things are happening a little faster than they thought they would. It's all changing. It's all just changing. And now I see this thing and like, this is really it. This is not some mad, wild ass guess, which is always kind of cool intellectual exercise. But you see, think, no, this is the real thing. This is really happening.
Yeah.
And I love that image on the left about, all the orbital spaces and where you might go in cislunar space. But, notice they divided Leo almost in half. It's like, okay, we got, Leo that can go way out here, but we also have like really close Leo.
Right.
Really low Earth orbit.
Low.
They divided, I guess, I don't know why they divided that kind of in two. Maybe it's a part of, the lower part's getting really crowded. So we had to, separate that from the rest of it.
Yeah.
So,
that bottom, low, very low Earth orbit. That's kind of a new, almost a new frontier in space.
Right. Well, of course, I joke about that with Ave Alto. We're going to be doing high altitude platforms. That's really, really low Earth orbit.
Right.
65,000 feet, 80,000 feet. Yeah. But we use satellite parts and you're geostationary. So that's something. But
let's use that. Let's use that graphic as a segue over to Axiom. What are your thoughts about the news out of Axiom this week?
Well, there's been a lot of screaming in certain quarters that I'm not going to quote because of that, because the people I'm talking to are saying Axiom had a chance not to have those financial challenges, and they turned their back on it, and they basically sold a flight. Actually, they sold it. They sold a flight to the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, because Saudi really wants to be a player and come in. And not knowing much about how their market works, it was suggested that since they really, really wanted to get in there and didn't have a craft of their own, they would probably pay a whole lot heck more for a seat than they've been charging to date. And they probably would have paid it without even batting an eye. They're spending $1 billion, trying to entice Tiger Woods to come over there and endorse one of their golf courses. You can't make this stuff up.
Right.
And so would they pay $250 million for a seat?
Maybe.
Yeah, they probably would without batting an eye.
Right.
And those guys wouldn't be now talking about, well, we got to change our business model because we have a cash flow struggle. It was completely unnecessary. And that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
I'm a big fan of all things space stations. I've been tracking space stations now for the last several years. In 2021, 2022, we hosted a series of conferences, digital conferences on space stations, and we came up with 14 space stations. And that's crazy because 3 more have been announced since then. Now, I didn't have a lot of confidence in some of them. Some of them were governmental, right? So, ISS and China's Heavenly Palace operational space stations. Last week we had 19 people in the sky. That's amazing. I'm so excited about that. You had a record there. One because of Polaris Dawn and their 4 people. We weren't supposed to have as many people on the International Space Station as we did. That's a whole nother problem that we discussed 2 weeks ago on this show when we were talking about Boeing Starliner problems. But the fact is, space stations are the next cool thing, right? We've mastered launch at some level with hundreds of potential launch companies and a launch that's happening about every 2 or 3 days somewhere in the world. We've mastered launch. We've mastered satellites with 8,000, almost 9,000 satellites in the sky. So the next thing to master is space stations. So along comes Axiom, this darling with a lot of NASA people behind it,
That's how they got a lot of funding originally.
If you've got 2 former NASA administrators on your board, that's a pretty good sign you know what the heck you're talking about, right? So here's a team that has literally banked hundreds of millions of dollars. Last thing I was tracking was $400 million in invested capital and contracts, NASA contracts for space stations. And then they branched out to build spacesuits because I think it was ILC Dover. I'm not sure of that. Don't quote me on that. I think it was ILC Dover or Sunstrand who had one of the big NASA contracts for spacesuits, basically dropped out of the business. So it left these guys. And just a few minutes ago, we were talking about how Artemis, Artemis is threatened because of the Space Launch System, but it's also threatened by not having spacesuits. So here's one of the big players in spacesuits. Their spacesuit side of their business is doing kind of okay. I thought it was going fine up until I read this. And then all of a sudden, their space station side of their business is eating their spacesuit side of their business. But when you have 800 people on payroll, 800 people on payroll, you're going to go through cash pretty fast. So I was pretty surprised by this. Honestly, this one completely caught me off guard. And talking about competition, you've got 2 government groups, the ISS and the Heavenly Palace, plus you've got those 2 groups have stuff on the drawing board. They have China has a second space station on the drawing board, not in development, and NASA has Gateway in development. So that's 4. And then there are some space station companies that I'm not going to name that have less than $5 million in a checking account. And honestly, you can't even get good blueprints for that little capital. So I don't give them a lot of credit. I'm fingers crossed. I hope they succeed. But there's about 5 or 6 of those at that level. And then, as this article is pointing out, Blue Origin has their orbital reef. Voyager, we've known the people at Voyager since, gosh, at least 20 years. Jeff Mamber and his team at
Right.
Nanarax. Vast is a new player. They didn't mention Max Space and also Gravitics. Those are two other new players. So yeah, there's, call it a dozen space stations in development of one kind or another, and the big ones have hundreds of millions of dollars in their checking account.
Yeah.
So, but hundreds of of dollars, if you have 800 employees, that doesn't last long. So I was really surprised by that.
That's a lot. That's a lot. You need hundreds of billions of dollars to support that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it seems to me when you're in the business of selling seats and the seats are limited, and you're making deals right and left, and you've got people that have boatloads of cash and want to get some seats, you charge what the traffic will bear. Just just do that, because they'd have an extra $1 billion in the bank now if they did that, and they charge 58 mil a seat instead, and they got their flight done, but now they're hurting, and it's nuts. It's just nuts.
It's nuts.
Yeah,
it's nuts. I hope for the best for these folks. Given who's on their team, you kind of assumed that they were going to succeed.
Exactly.
At least I did. I took it kind of for granted that they were going to be okay. I think there was somebody said, I think they had some like Italian designer, maybe it was Prada, that was doing the design of the interior. Maybe it was some of the folks from the iPhone. They had some like name brand designer group for their interior. I mean, they definitely were spending some money on this stuff.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the food packs from Martha Stewart. It's
right.
I'm still waiting on that. We've been talking about that for 25 years, and she hasn't put in an entry yet.
That would be awesome. We should ask for that. If only I knew somebody who used to work for her. Maybe we could get that.
Oh yeah, I did some consulting for them long time ago. I may still know somebody who works there. I don't know. I'll have to check in on that. But I think moving on, the next thing you found something interesting just before the show that you wanted to talk about.
Oh yeah,
a defense contract of some kind.
Yeah. So this
that was going to change the game possibly in point-to-point space delivery.
Yeah. So this article came out last week, and honestly, I thought this was going to be giant news, and it really wasn't. First of all, before we get into the details of it, I want to point out a couple of things. So Sandra Irwin is probably the best defense space reporter in the business right now. She's been doing this for a long time. She came from a defense background and has really, really dug into the space side of it in the last few years. She was a guest on one of our prior shows for the Foundation for the Future and their series of shows.
Yeah.
And I really became very impressed by her because she knows a lot of the people and a lot of the players. So I just kind of assumed that when she wrote this article, it was going to be blasted everywhere. And I think people didn't really understand the significance of this thing. So that's why I wanted to bring it to your attention, Tom, because I'm gonna skip to the, and once again, internet problems. What is going on in my world today? I can't actually get to the full article because I can't scroll down. There we go. This piece right here.
Okay.
Autonomous. Yeah. Autonomous reentry vehicles that can be called to Earth on demand will transform logistics and rapid access, even to the most remote parts of the globe.
Yeah, I can see why the military would be interested in this.
Okay, as I've said lots of times before, I'm a former U.S. Marine, and when I was a kid, I loved the story from by Heinlein, Starship Troopers.
Uh-huh.
So imagine a world where this is all cargo. I just want to make sure everybody's clear. This is precise delivery of critical cargo. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about point-to-point delivery of cargo from anywhere in the world to anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. This is going to be a situation where, if you can imagine, Spaceport America standing by with Tom, you're about to have a hurricane down there in Florida. So now what if we need medical supplies? What if we need blood? What if we need more sandbags? I don't know.
I go to Daytona Beach, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to land a rocket under hurricane conditions just yet. But once the hurricane ends, point-to-point medical supplies would be a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
But going back to the jarhead in me, the U.S. Marine in me, I don't think Russia invades Ukraine if you've got 5,000 combat-ready Marines standing by to go to any hotspot in the world as needed. I think the world changes if you have point-to-point delivery of precious cargo. I think that's a huge element. And I was really surprised that this thing got missed. Now, that's the point-to-point topic, right? There's more to this story, but you want to talk about point-to-point for a second, or you want to move on to the other stuff?
I do. This is your story.
Okay. So I've always been a believer that point-to-point was the magic elixir, the key to the future. In the same way that the early aircraft and jet engines changed the world in the 40s, then the 50s, then the 60s, then the 70s, then the 80s, it shrank the world. I don't think anything shrinks the world more than 45 minutes to get from Los Angeles to Tokyo, Seattle to London. I don't think anything changes the world faster than point-to-point suborbital transportation, and that means people after cargo, right? So cargo is the first piece. So that's one thing. The second thing about this is the people involved here, inversion space and outpost space. I know the outpost people pretty well. Failed internet, unbelievable. Well, I'm not showing that. I know the folks at Outpost reasonably well. I've been. They're the folks that built Made in Space, which led to Redwire's acquisition. And Redwire is one of the companies that we talked about last episode when we were talking about SPACs.
Yeah.
So all of this is very full circle. The Made in Space people, the Redwire people, have put real hardware into the sky for a long time, and they are good at it. Jason Dunn at Outpost, he started this whole thing as a school project at Singularity University, I think about 2008, maybe.
Mhm.
As a school project at Singularity University, Singularity U, and then took it to the pros in the venture group to get Made in Space funded, and then they went up the SPAC tree to get Redwire, and now he's cashed out from that and is saying, okay, what's the next problem in space? So he solved the how do you create something in space, and now what he's trying to figure out is how do we get something that is made on orbit down to the ground, right? Varda is trying to do that. Inversion's trying to do that. Varda's trying to do pharmaceuticals. Redwire was Made in Space was working on fiber optic cables. So all of these companies are saying, hey, getting stuff back down to the ground is actually its own technology problem. So that's what they're aiming to do. And then the last experience, they know the industry. And then this last piece, this strategic funding initiative, StratFi, that's a relatively new program that was developed really at the in the early days of the pandemic. Its origin story was part of the space industrial base meetings that they host each year, looking at like what is the near future and how do we deal with it. And the Space Industrial Board meetings reports really were originally talking about supply chain problems, and then they expanded. And so one of the things that came out of that was, how does the government signal to private industry that this is a technology that the government wants to get developed, right? And so sometimes they talk about anchor tenancies in real estate where you have a Walmart or a McDonald's, and then you build other businesses around it. Well, and sometimes NASA is considered an anchor tenant at the International Space Station. But the phrase that came out of these industrial space-based meetings was a lighthouse customer, meaning these are safe passages. These are areas where there's been a course charted, and that this is a path we want to take. So it's Uncle Sam as a lighthouse customer. Okay. And so StratFi came out of that thinking. And so these companies, Inversion and Outpost, they earned a couple $1 million, $15 million for the both of them, from SBIRs, Small Business Innovation Research grants. But then the government comes in and matches them 4-1. So if they go find private capital, they can get government capital matching them 4-1. Tell me, Tom, is there an investor that you know of that will not take a 4-1 bump on their money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They'll all absolutely. They'll all do that.
Always. Right. Yeah, and so the companies have to find $15 million, and then they get matched 300% of that.
Yeah,
$45 million total, $60 million.
Yep, that's what they did. Yeah, they took 50. It was that 15. The original 15 came from SBIR.
Yeah. So it's a remarkable system. It really is, and just to kind of watch this happen very, very quickly, right? From the ideation stage, Jason getting cashed out of what is now Redwire, but what was then Made in Space, and I don't think Jason's been at Made in Space for quite a while. I don't think he's been there for quite a while, long before they got bought up. But yeah, just this little layer after layer after layer after layer all of these little pieces coming together to make a really big impact. So smart people getting good capitalization to solve a known problem that I think point-to-point suborbital is going to be a global game changer. So I feel like I'm a little bit on a soapbox on this one, but I'm really excited about it.
Maybe, but but the good news is, I mean, we have a whole bunch of stuff that we're probably not going to have time to talk about now because we got like 9 minutes. So good for us. I was worried earlier. We were collecting all these stories. I thought, is this going to be able to fill this hour? Are you kidding? We haven't talked about half of them. I'm thinking about finishing it up just because it's kind of interesting. This came out in the Space Review yesterday. Jeff Faust, story, and it's about, and it really kind of surprised me. My eyebrows go up a little bit because it's about launch companies that are now struggling with FAA licensing issues.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which triggered me a little bit because I remember, in 2005, space advocacy groups like the ones we've been in actually helped write the enabling legislation to make AST happen. And AST is a subset of FAA that specifically is a regulatory body that will provide launch licenses to new types of service providers. And they've been doing it very well for a long time. But I got to be honest with you, when we started this, I mean, regulatory capture was built into the source code. We knew that was going to happen. And years ago, the first guy who ran it was George Neal, that I caught him in his cups at a DLR party at IAC in 2016 in Guadalajara. And I asked him about that. Yes, we were regulatory captured. I'm proud. I was proud to be captured. It was, because it was pretty easy to go through the process.
Yeah.
But since then, what I didn't understand from this article is that apparently a whole new set of new regulations have replaced a lot of the old ones and came into play in early 2021. And at the time, the FAA was claiming, well, this is going to streamline the process. It's going to be more streamlined than ever before, and you're going to get your permits even faster. Mm-hmm. And exactly the opposite has happened.
Right.
And everybody's complaining about it. And of course, the biggest complainer, who? SpaceX.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I think a lot of this story came up because SpaceX itself was at the crux of a lot of interesting discussions with them because where is it? Oh, here we go. Yeah, because they're waiting right now. For example, the new Flight 5 of Starship is all stacked and ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Are pending regulatory approval. They've been kind of, somebody's been stalling. They're claiming that the FAA is stalling on this. They were supposed to complete the licensing determination a week ago, and then all of a sudden they recently pushed it back to November 22nd and then November 26th. And they said the delays were linked to the work needed to modify the license, which apparently has changed for each Starship flight. So,
yeah.
So the company is pushing for mission by mission approvals, and that's the pace problem. But then there were other things that happened like over a year ago that they want to now fine SpaceX for essentially were minor violations of a couple of a Falcon 9, a Falcon Heavy launch,
right,
through the in two missions in the middle of last year. Now they want to fine them for that. They're saying these things should never have been escalated that much because they were just minor things, and it could have been handled with shuffling some more paper around. And so now Elon is calling it lawfare, and he plans on suing them.
Yep. Yeah, it's. I don't love his tactics, but in this case, I do have a certain amount of sympathy. That this stuff is hard, and it's if you want to launch, on time, right? You've got now customers that expect a certain result.
Right.
You've got to get permissions. And so I'm going to just post this for just a moment.
But it's a funny thing when even the lawyers are complaining.
Right.
There's this outfit called KMA Zuckert LLC. They're a space law practice group, and one of these committee hearings, the chair of the group said, "We have a licensing regime with a lack of certainty, a lack of transparency, and significant delays."
Jesus.
And so that's where a lot of this comes from. And so and these new rules are called, they're all collected under something they now call Part 450, the new launch licensing regulations.
Right. Yep.
And everyone's trying to, figure out how to work with that, and they're all having a problem. And and they're afraid. Like one guy, one of the reps from Texas said he feared at this rate the Chinese, Communist Party will launch taikonauts to the moon while U.S. industry remains tethered to Earth with, a bunch of red tape. Now he's probably, he's speaking for his base, obviously, but there's, there almost no one was defending the current licensing process.
No, it's crazy. This guy Tom Murata, fun fact, in 2005, I think, Tom worked for me. And fast forward, I eventually helped him get a job at the FAA in the licensing department at the FAA. And he has since left the FAA and become the CEO of the spaceport company, which, by the way, will benefit from point-to-point suborbital, I think.
Sure.
But here's this quote: regardless of of what you think about SpaceX or the politics, the speed of decision-making needs to be faster. If FAA is going to make a decision, whether it's positive or negative for a launch operator, that operator needs the decision sooner, right? That is the pace of industry. And government doesn't historically operate at the pace of industry. So,
right.
Yeah, I think Tom said it well. Tom said it well. Like, regardless of what you think about Musk or SpaceX or the company or the politics or any of that, this is an industry and it needs to have certainty. So, yeah, it's crazy. All right, sir, I'm going to bail out of here. Thank you so much. Feel free to close us out here. Thanks for covering me for some of those glitches. I appreciate that. I'm out. I'll see you.
Okay, man. We'll see you. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Close us out. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the news we found interesting this September 24th. Come back to us in 2 weeks on October 8th, where we will be discussing the new book by Greg Autry and Peter Navarro called Red Moon Rising. We are in a new space race. It's not your grandfather's space race. There's a lot more at stake for the future of humanity. And Greg Autry is going to be here to explain exactly why. See you next time. From the news desk at the Center for Space Commerce and Finance, I'm Thomas Andrew Olson. Keep watching the sky.